Eu pego o marido, eu já volto.
Okay, welcome everyone. Good to see you all here. We'll be speaking in English and a little bit of Portuguese as well, but we'll try to keep it in English. But we always invite you guys to join the conversation, comments, questions in English or Portuguese. Doesn't really matter. And to start off, one of the announcements that we have is that our next Sunday on February 12th we'll have a soup lunch. This is usually the gathering that we do during the winter, so we can have some hot soup and enjoy our time together. So we'll have our talk from 11 to 12, as we usually do every Sunday, and then afterwards we'll have a lunch right here. We'll just move a few chairs around and then we can have lunch together. So hope to see you all here, and if you're coming, if you could let Carol know, so she can know how much soup to make. And let's start today. And to start off, we usually read a text from one of the books from. Usually, it's a book from Francisco Cândido Xavier. Today, I chose a text from this book. It's called Religião dos Espíritos, or Religion of Spirits. And the nice thing about this book is that it's one of the attempts from Emmanuel, who's the spirit who writes this, to bring together the gospel and Spiritism. So this book, Emmanuel brings a passage from the Gospel of Jesus and also a question from the Spirit's book, and line them up, and then gives an interpretation just to show how aligned they are. So I'll read a text just so we can, harmonize ourselves and calm down, and then we'll get into our prayer and our talk. So the text is number 11, and it's called Purity. And this was psychographed actually on February 16th, so almost a few weeks ago. On 1959, so quite a few years ago. And the question from the Spirit's book that Emmanuel talks about is question 632, which we'll see a little bit later. And the passage from the Gospel that he brings to this is the passage that's part of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, when Jesus says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And the interpretation goes like this. Studying the word of the Divine Master, let us remember that in the world, until today, there has been no one like him, with such purity in his soul. It is up to us, therefore, to remember how Jesus saw the path of life, to recognize with certainty that, although on earth, he knew how to find the divine presence in all situations and in all creatures. For many people, the manger was a despicable place. However, he saw God in the humility with which nature offered him a maternal lap, and transformed the stable into a poem of sublime beauty. For many people, Mary of Magdala was a woman without any value, due to the obsessed condition in which she showed herself in public life. However, Jesus saw God in that female heart, grated with suffering, and converted her into a messenger of the heavenly resurrection. For many people, Simon Peter was a rude and inconstant man, unworthy of greater consideration. However, Jesus saw God in the troubled spirit of the semi-illiterate fisherman, that the people despised and transmuted him into a paradigm of the Christian faith for all centuries. To many people, Judas was a suspicious-looking businessman, capable of tuning ruses in his own praise. However, he saw God in the restless soul of the companion, whom the others looked down upon, and extended friendly arms to him until the end of the painful desertion to which the distracted disciples surrendered. For many people, Saul of Tarsus was the intransigent guardian of the old law, vain and perverse, in defense of his own whims. However, he saw God in that tormented spirit and sought him out personally to entrust him with an important embassy. If you thus purify your heart, you will identify the presence of God everywhere, understanding that the Creator's hope does not fade in any creature, and you will realize that evil and crime are only thorns and mud that involve the field of the soul, which, brilliant, divine, will inevitably come to light. And by learning and serving, helping and loving, you will pass on earth through an incessant message of love, teaching the man around you to convert the pond into a cradle of bread, and to understand that even in the depths of the swamp, fragrant and pure lilies can arise to exalt the glory of God. So now I invite you all to join me in a little prayer, closing our eyes and elevating our thoughts into Jesus, and imagining this older brother of ours looking at us, gazing at us, so we can feel his love, his compassion, his understanding, and feel that energy of peace that he can bring to us. We ask you, Jesus, that you be here with us today, and that we can humble our hearts so we can listen to your inspirations, so your words can touch us and help us in our journeys. And we can all, as a community, grow one by one together. And thank you, Lord, for the opportunity of us all being here today and this fine Sunday to strengthen our communion with you and with all our brothers and sisters. So be it. Okay. Welcome. Good to see you. Today we'll be talking about the gaze of Jesus, which is why I did this prayer, where we'll be reflecting upon how would Jesus look at us? How's his gaze? How's his look? How's his sight? And we'll reflect about how can that play a role in our lives? How can that help us? And how can we learn from Jesus just by his looks? Not the way he looks, but just the way he looks at us. And our talk today is based on a few books. We have The Gaze of Jesus, which was a talk performed by Artur Valadares, who's a Spiritist in Brazil, a few days ago. And this book called Religion of Spirits, which is what we just read. There's also this book called Boa Nova, or Good News. We'll be referring to this book. Also, there's a book called Traveler, which we don't have here, but it's also by Francisco Cândido Xavier. And then just last minute, I added a snippet from this book here called the way, the truth, and the life, or Caminho, Verdade e Vida, also by Francisco Cândido Xavier. So there's lots for us to use to help our reflection today. And as I said before, please interrupt me, and so we can get the conversation going. So I don't bore you too much. And like I said, in this book here, one of the questions that was based on the text that he wrote was question 632 from the Spirit's book, that little blue book there, where Kardec asks something that I believe we might have asked ourselves before, perhaps many times. He asks, since humans are prone to error, couldn't they be mistaken in discerning good from evil, and believe that they are doing what is good when in reality they're doing what's evil? So I believe we might have asked this question already when we do something, thinking that we mean well, we're doing the right thing, but it turns out later on we find that that's actually wasn't the best approach, wasn't the best way of doing it. So it's having that discernment to understand, is this the correct, is this a good way, or is this not the good way to behave or to act? And Kardec asked the exact same thing, because that discernment is a tough one to do. It's something that as we evolve, our discernment improves. So what would the Spirit's reply to this question that many of us might have asked ourselves? They actually resort to Jesus when Jesus said, "Do unto others what you would want them to do unto you." That sums up everything. So this is a passage by Jesus that I would think that many of us know. This is also called in English the Golden Rule. In Portuguese, I believe it's the Lei Áurea. So yeah, it's a very famous passage. And then they end with, "Obey it, and you will never go wrong." So here is where we start thinking about when we're going to act, when we're going to say something, to put ourselves in that position and ask ourselves, how would I like to receive that message? How would I like to receive that action or whatever it may be? Right? That can help us discern. Maybe I shouldn't act that way, and I should, in turn, perhaps change my position. And when I was reflecting about this a little bit yesterday, I thought about something else that we can do here, which is to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, or to add a little bit of empathy to this. And as an example, hopefully you can relate to this. Let's say you're bringing, for example, you're bringing some bad news to someone, like a family member passed away, and you're going to tell this to that person. The one thing they would do is think, well, how would I like to receive the message that someone close to me passed away? And then you think about that, and then you convey the message. But the empathy part of the reflection is that we could put ourselves in their shoes and understand the situation that they are going through. Because perhaps, a family member passed away, but perhaps their dog is not doing so well, or their kid is sick, or they are in a situation that's put them in a very subtle or in a very delicate position. So getting the news that someone passed away would be very, even more hurtful. So by putting ourselves in their position, it can even further our discernment of how to act. What's the good or what's the not so good way to act. So it's all about reflection, and hence the picture that we have here. And this makes me think about something that Victor Frankl said. Victor Frankl, he's a Swiss, was a Swiss psychiatrist who went to concentration camps back in the Second World War. And he said that between stimulus and a response, there's a space. So when we're stimulated to do something, to act, before we act or before we react, there's a split of a second there. There's a space. And he says that it's in that space that our power to choose our response lies. And it is there that our growth and our freedom exists. Meaning that when we get a stimulus, so when we get, I don't know, if somebody curses at us, let's say, we have a split of a second there that we can choose our response. If we're not reflecting, we'll just react. But if we stand there for a few seconds and reflect, how would I like to be treated? And then instead of reacting to something, we're actually acting with purpose, with intent. And this is something that Jesus did quite a bit, and we'll see throughout our talk today, that he would never react to things. He would always ponder, he would always think, and then answer, and then act. So that was the first reflection, just to bring this question from the Spiritist book, and to start thinking about how this can help myself, how this can help us within our lifetimes. And today will be about storytelling as well. We'll be telling a few stories. So hopefully, if you've read this book here called Nava, the Good News, there is a chapter, I believe it's 26, that talks about Peter, Simon Peter. And it's around the Last Supper. If any of you have read it or know about the Last Supper, there is that passage in the Last Supper when Jesus starts to kneel down and to wash the apostles' feet. And he goes from apostle to apostle, and then he gets to Peter. And Peter, for those of you who know, he was very stern and very harsh sometimes. And then when Jesus came to him to wash his feet, Peter said, "You will never wash my feet, Master. My companions," so like everyone that let you wash their feet, they're being ungrateful to you. They're being harsh to you right now, letting you practice this gesture as if you were a common slave. So this was Peter telling the master that, no, you're not going to wash my feet. And how dare the others let you do that? And following these words, he looked at all the apostles with a very stern look, with a very judgmental look, thinking, how dare you let Jesus do this to you? And Jesus answered to him. He said, "Simon, do not desire to be better than your brothers in the apostolate, in any circumstance of life." So this was Simon Peter judging, right, his other apostles. And Jesus sensed why he was doing that. It's because Peter was trying to be better than his other apostles and judging them. And so Jesus said, "Do not desire to be better than others." And we might start reflecting, why would Jesus say this? I thought part of what Jesus taught us was to be kind to ourselves, but also to grow, also to improve. And then he says this. Well, if you read this, he's talking about comparison. He's talking about, comparing ourselves to others and wanting to be better than others. And there's a very fine line here between wanting to grow and wanting to be better than others. Because when we're comparing ourselves and wanting to be better than others, we fall into our pride. We fall into our judgment. And in doing so, we'll be picking out everything that's wrong with everyone so we can lower them and we can feel better. So Jesus was saying, do not do that. Don't point other people's faults. And then continuing the story, right? He said, Jesus, this was the Last Supper, right? So this was the time when Jesus, they had their Last Supper, and then Jesus was going to go away and get incarcerated, and you probably know how that story ends. So at that time when Jesus said he was going to go away, he said that the apostles could not follow him, because at that point on, Jesus was going to separate himself from the apostles. And again, Peter could not understand it. He got really angry. He said, how can I not follow you? You know, I've done so much for you. I've learned so much from you. How is it that I cannot follow you? Like, do you not trust me? So Peter was a little antsy there. He was getting a little mad. And then the Christ, again, you can see the Christ smiled and pondered. The Christ didn't react, right? Didn't get angry at him. On the contrary, he smiled and pondered and said, Peter, your restlessness shows your need for new teachings. Experience will teach you better conclusions, because truly I tell you that tonight the rooster will not crow until you have denied me 3 times. Again, it's a famous passage from the Gospel here that talks about Peter's denials. If any of you remember that, Jesus was saying that, Peter, you will deny me 3 times, and once you deny me 3 times, a rooster will crow, or a rooster will galo vai cantar. I think that's how you say it. I don't know if galos cantam, but
We got it.
they do something, yeah. So yeah, that was what Jesus was telling Peter that was going to happen. And so he said, Peter's restlessness, his restlessness, his anxiety of always wanting to be right, just showed him that he needed to learn more. He was still not ready to go and preach.
Maybe because he was reacting to, right?
Always reacting. He was always reacting.
Always automatic.
Always reacting. He was never taking the time to, absorb what happened, reflect, and then act, or pondered and smiled. Thank you, Sonia. Exactly. And then Peter got even angrier and said, how are you telling me that I'm going to deny you 3 times? I would die for it. He literally said, I will give my life for you, Jesus. How are you telling me that I'm going to deny you? So again, he said, no, Peter. Advanced the master with sweetness. He said, I don't suppose you are ungrateful or indifferent to my teachings. So he's not saying that I think you're ungrateful or indifferent to my teachings. But you will learn, even today, that the man of the world is more fragile than perverse. This is one of my favorite sentences of this entire book, which is a great book, by the way. Highly recommend. But this brings us a whole idea on how to see others and how to see ourselves, and how to help us forgive, how to help us be a little bit more compassionate. Understanding that the man of the world, us, we're more fragile than perverse, meaning that a lot of times we act out of ignorance rather than evil. So it's a very kind way of helping us be more compassionate and empathetic. And this was something that Jesus said, you will learn this, Peter. Trust me that you will learn. Because Peter did not live by this. On the contrary, right? He saw everybody's mistakes and used those mistakes to shame them, as we'll see a little bit later. And then he said, the man of the world is more fragile than perverse. Perhaps he shouldn't be so strict. And so when that happened, Jesus moved away, and then the guards came and took Jesus away and incarcerated Jesus. And because the guards were there, they were, anybody who was one of Jesus' apostles would probably go with him, right, and also be incarcerated. So you can, picture the square of, a bunch of people and a bunch of guards taking Jesus away. And then some people around there, they would look at Peter and they would say, hold on, I think that guy is one of Jesus' apostles. Call the guards. And then Peter said, no, I'm not one of Jesus' apostles. I don't know him. And then another time, just a few minutes later, somebody else pointed out to Peter and said, hey, I think he's one of Christ's followers. And then Peter said, no, I don't know him. I have nothing to do with him. And then another time, Peter denied Jesus. So he denied him 3 times. And in that moment, after the third denial, and you can read this in the gospel as well, the rooster crowed. Or galo. Tem uma palavra que eu não sei. Mas o galo cantou. And in that moment, it kind of struck Peter. And he realized, oh my God, I just denied Christ 3 times. And just, half an hour ago, I said that I would die for him. Right? How is that possible that I say that I'm going to die for somebody and then, a few minutes later I deny them 3 times? So he started to see his own faults, to realize that he was not perfect, and then he also had faults. And in that moment, when he realized that, he went to the where the cell of Jesus was to see him. And in that moment, they kind of locked eyes. So Peter saw Jesus, and in that moment, he saw the serene gaze of Jesus contemplating him. And this is the whole point of the talk. It's the serene gaze of Jesus contemplated him. So Jesus knew that Peter had denied him 3 times. But instead of judging Peter, instead of condemning Peter, Jesus looked at him with a serene gaze, with love, with kindness, with compassion. And that literally took Peter by surprise, and he got really touched, and he actually went outside and started thinking about everything that he had done, and he started to weep, and he realized that perhaps the way is not to be so strict, is not to point faults, but rather to focus on welcoming or acolher, to be kinder, or to be more compassionate, as opposed to be so strict and stern. And in this moment, then, we can think about how was Jesus' look at Peter. And Adu Valadares, he describes this in such a nice way. He says that the look or the gaze of Jesus never demands anything, but just hopes. It never condemns, but sees the potential in all of us. It loves, and it invites us to renewal, and it consoles us deeply and awakens us for the truth. But then, if you think about how did Peter look at others, that was not the case. He would actually condemn, he would actually judge, and he would actually point out loudly their mistakes. So much so that there was another passage from Jesus and Peter that they were together, and 4 men came to where they were. So you had Peter, Jesus, and 4 other men. And Jesus said, "Okay, Peter, you know the truth, so use it." And then Jesus stepped away, and then Peter used the truth to show to all these 4 men everything that they had done wrong. They said, "You did this, this, and this, and this wrong, so how dare you come and talk to Jesus if you have so many faults on you?" So he used the truth to shame them. And then Jesus comes back, and Peter's all proud, saying, "Jesus, I did what you asked me to." And then Jesus looked at these 4 men who were, pretty down because they'd just been, schooled on everything they'd done wrong. And then Jesus said, "Peter, you did nothing like I asked you to. You use the truth to crush them. You use the truth to condemn them. I asked you to use the truth to support them, to help them, to love them." And when we read this passage and we start to reflect about it, this brings us to a good reflection. And here this is the main slide of the talk, is how are we using the truth? How are we using the things that we learn? One that comes to mind that I cannot speak for experience because I'm not a parent, but it's one that we hear a lot, is a parent saying, if I'd known what I know now, I would have probably done it differently with my kids. So how are we using that truth? Now that I know more, are we condemning what we did in the past? Are we being harsh on ourselves for what we did in the past? Are we doing it like Peter? Or are we doing it like Jesus? Are we using the truth, the knowledge that we know now, to, yes, identify our faults, but never fixate on the faults, but fixating on a more serene gaze, on a more understanding way of looking at ourselves? A non-judgmental way, but a loving, a kind, a way, a gaze that sees our potential to improve as opposed to point our faults and issues. And this goes to, the way we look at ourselves, but also the way we look at others, right? This can happen to, whenever even you start to learn about the gospel, when you start to learn about Spiritism, when you start to learn about, if you read a lot of Joana de Angelis, who is one of the spirit that write through the medium Divaldo Pereira Franco, she talks a lot about psychology as well. So once you start to get these new, understandings around psychology, around Spiritism, around Jesus, are we using it to condemn others? Are we using it to judge others? And, we don't have to go that far off, but if you just look at, what happened since Jesus came to earth, we took it to a different path sometimes. Instead of using his words to be loving and kind, we took it the other direction. We took it to a way to condemn, to even kill in the past. So it's a very fine line of how we use the truth, how we use any new knowledge that we acquire. So the question is, am I analyzing it like Peter does, or like Jesus does? And there's a pastor in the United States called priest called Gregory Boyle, and he works in communities down in the States to help communities that are in need. And the one thing that he said that resonates a lot with me, he says that the ultimate measure of health in a new or any community might reside in our ability to stand in awe at what folks have to carry, rather than in judgment at how they carry it. So stand in awe is to look at them and realize, wow, look at everything they have to do, look at everything they have to carry, as opposed to, you're not doing that right, you're not carrying it that right, I have a better way to do it. Right? Instead of fall into judgment right away, instead stand in awe of what they have to carry, of what they have done to get to where they are today. So again, that's a great way to see the different looks, the different gazes that Jesus would always look at us in awe. He never looks at us with judgment, but instead he looks at us, and we'll see in the text that we read in the beginning how his skills, how his knowledge helped him to always see God in everything. How to see God in us, how to see God in everything, instead of looking at others in judgment.
Just
please.
Comment, Victor. It's amazing how we read a book or a passage of Jesus so many times, and every time that we read, we learn something new. And this passage that you mentioned about the good news, Boa Nova, I have read before, and it's very touching, because we really feel how Peter was feeling that moment. But now, today, I realized that a virtue, the virtue to be indulgent for his act in that moment, thinking how he was fragile in that moment, how afraid he was feeling, as all the other apostles, other than John, that was with Jesus all the time and with his mother, how much afraid those guys were.
Yeah.
So he react with this feeling, like he react in that way, denying Jesus because he was trying to protect himself. And when he realized that, how much suffering, and at the same time, how much brave he was to not, condemn himself, and feel depressed or do what Judas did. So he was at the same time reflecting about his act, thinking about what Jesus said to him, and move on. And how much important it is for us to do that all the time, like every single minute of our lives. How many times during one day we did something that oh gosh, I have not done that. I should have done better. And how much indulgence we need to be with ourselves as well. Not condemn ourselves, but looking at ourselves as Jesus looked at Peter, with compassion, feeling that we are apprentices and we will commit mistakes. And what we can do about that is just reflecting about what we did, learned from our mistakes, and move on. Because Jesus knows how we are in this right moment. And also he knows all the potentials that we have to be better. And this is our learning process. He understands that and he loves us. This is the way that we are right here, right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Sonia. Exactly. He knows us better than we do. Yeah. He knows all our faults, but he also knows all our virtues and all our potential. So yeah, that leads to the question, how does Jesus look at us, right? Next time, I guess, suggest an exercise. Next time that we start to judge ourselves or to look at things that we don't like about ourselves, before we go down that rabbit hole, pause that and ask ourselves, how would Jesus look at me right now? Would he also be judgmental?
When you were talking, Sonia, too, about the judgment piece, that was just came to my mind, a very good book that I would even recommend. It's very easy reading. It's with a psychiatrist, he has a great work with children from trauma and foster care, and he writes with Oprah. So anyway, they talk a lot about trauma. Okay. And one thing that sticks with the book and with the approach that he actually developed is how can we shift the question to what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And then I remember I didn't read it, was audio, so it was kind of like a podcast. My respect to Oprah even grew after that, because she does her role is pretty much like an interviewer, but she summarizes and she talks about her own traumas.
Okay.
And there is a passage that she talks about her birth mom. And there was a very abusive relationship and all, and when her mom was passing on. And she heard the news and she had a whole bunch of other things to do. And then she's very Christian, so she just asked herself, what should I be doing here right now? Because she couldn't connect to this mother that was not a mom to her. And then that she went back and she stayed holding her hand and singing to that mom. And then that's when she says that she could actually forgive herself. and forgive that mom, and understand that this mom was also like a teenage mom that came from an abusive relationship, and like in everything that they were talking in the book about trauma, that she herself, Oprah said, like she lived, she could understand that the other person did too. And that makes sense to me when we talk, like it's more out of ignorance than being mean or being evil to someone else.
Exactly. In that moment, I guess Oprah might have realized, right, that her mom was actually more fragile than evil, about the things that she did to her. Thank you. Thank you, Ju. It's nice to have testaments to show that, it works, I guess, right? Shifting away from judgment into compassion and understanding. Absolutely. And I think I'll stop here. There is another thing that I wanted to bring about here, and Sonia's talked a lot about this before, and it's around, when we look at ourselves and we do see a fault, we do see something that we don't really like. What is our process to change that? Are we forcing ourselves? Are we demanding ourselves to change? Or are we, accepting first who we are, and out of love, slowly trying to improve? So are we forcing it, or are we being more gentle and more kind and understanding that we have faults, and slowly look at improving us? And the reflection on this piece here comes from, there's a couple, it's on these two of these books. One is the Gospel According to Spiritism, one is the Medium's book. They both say that a bad energy, or they use a bad fluid, can never be extinguished by another bad fluid. So you can never, for example, you can never extinguish evil with more evil. So if we're trying to improve one of our faults, we can never do that by forcing us, by demanding, because that's just another bad energy, if you will. That's forcing us to change. So you can't, and one of my favorite songs from Adele actually, she says, you can't fight fire with fire. You can't really try to change something by behaving in also a way that's judgmental, that is demanding, and so on and so forth. So that gentleness that the gaze of Jesus can teach us can be applied to anything that we see in ourselves and that we see in others. And to bring, and this goes in line with what Jude was saying actually, right now we're going to see some examples of how just the gaze of Jesus, this loving gaze, has helped transform so many people. Because it's by looking at testaments, by looking at examples, that we can prove to ourselves that that actually works, because it has worked with others. And this comes from a couple books. Again, this Religion of Spirits that we just read, and also a book called Traveler by Francisco Xavier. And they both talk about the gaze of Jesus. And they say that it is up to us to remember how Jesus saw the path of life, and to recognize that with certainty, even on earth, he knew how to find the divine presence in all situations and in all creatures. He was also always focusing on looking at the divine presence that exists in everything. Be it in a person, an animal, like the divine presence is in everything. So our focus, is it to see the divine presence, or is it to see the faults? And like Emmanuel says, the Divine Master never focused on the dark band of humans. He always focused on their virtues. And instead of focusing on the dark bands, he always focused on the potential. Because when we focus on the potential of us, of ourselves, and onto others, that motivates us to improve. That motivates us to get better. and it doesn't condemn us. It doesn't make us feel guilty. So, learning from Jesus. And one of the things that Arthur brings to us, he says, for many people, the manger was a despicable place. The manger is where Jesus, the little crib. Manjadora, thank you. The manger was the manjadora. And he saw God in the humility with which nature offered him a maternal lap and transformed the stable into a poem of sublime beauty. So he was able to see God in that humble manger where the nature offered him this maternal lap. And to this day, right, the image, the scene, the nativity scene that we see around gets celebrated almost, well, at least once a year in many homes, right? It's that image of humbleness. Okay, so Mary of Magdala. So we're going to look at her now as an example of how she transformed herself. Emmanuel tells us that for many people, Mary of Magdala was a woman without any value due to the obsessed condition in which she showed herself in public life. In Mary of Magdala, he doesn't, I'm not talking about Jesus, right? In her, Jesus did not see the woman possessed by the shadows, geniuses, but he saw the suffering sister, and for this reason, he restores her own dignity, molding in her the renewed spiritual beauty that would later convey to her the divine message of the resurrection. This is really interesting, and I won't have time, but there is a text here in this book, The Way, the Truth, and the Life, that's called Mary, or Magdalene. And it talks about how Jesus saw Mary of Magdalene and how he chose her to be the divine messenger of the resurrection. When Jesus resurrected, he went to Mary of Magdalene first. So she was the messenger, the first messenger that was chosen by Jesus to tell everyone that he had resurrected. It wasn't Mary, his mom. It wasn't Peter. It wasn't any other of the apostles, but it was Mary. And Emmanuel takes a stab at interpreting why, and he says that it was because Mary of Magdala was the one that changed and transformed herself the most while living with Jesus. And I won't have time, but there's a great explanation.
There's a chapter on one of the two, right?
Yes, there is.
Mary Magdala, and her story is so wonderful. Like she showed herself in a way of resolution, to really change herself in a so big way that it's amazing. And it's a great message and a great example for all of us to look at ourselves with that compassion and that love, because she showed the self-love, like this virtue in a so great way, and in faith as well. So it's a beautiful story about her life. It's very worth it to read.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sonia. She's a great symbol of change, of renunciation, of humility, of how much she had to change just to be with Jesus, because she had temptations to go away from him quite a bit, and she had to work on herself day in and day out to be with him. When you think of all the other apostles, they wanted to be with Jesus, but she had to change herself in order to keep on going. So she truly was a great messenger, and that's why Christ chose her to be the first to see him again when he resurrected. Emmanuel says that the gospel is nothing else than a golden code of transformed lives. So if we start to read the gospel and we start to pick these people, I guess, we could see the transformation that the gospel can bring to all of us. The other one is Simon Peter. We talked about him already a lot. But Simon Peter, Emmanuel says, he was a rude and inconstant man, unworthy of greater consideration. However, Jesus saw God in the troubled spirit of the semi-illiterate fisherman that the people despised, and transmuted him into the paradigm of Christian faith for all centuries. So who of us would have looked at Peter and seen in him one of the greatest apostles of Christ before he joined Christ, right? If you're just walking around and you see Peter and you know how he is rude, how he is inconstant, would we realize or would we think that he could be one of the great apostles, right? Probably not. But Jesus, again, his gaze and his look, he saw the troubled spirit and saw the potential that he had to transform. And in that moment that we talked about, and Sunil also talked about, when Peter, realized that he had denied Christ 3 times and he felt really bad, he felt really ashamed, in that moment he started to change. In that moment he became, instead of being judgmental, he became a loving person. To the point that in the book Paul and Stephen, we can see that when Paul of Tarsus, Paul of Tarsus was a person that was chasing down Christians and was killing Christians, and then after a while, we'll talk about it more, but he transformed himself, and then he went to ask for forgiveness, I guess, and he went to a Christian church, and it was Peter who greeted him at the church. And Peter was in front of Paul who had killed a lot of his friends. Peter, instead of judging him, instead of condemning him, instead of saying everything that Paul had done wrong, he took him in. So you can see how Peter transformed throughout his life. He accepted one that was chasing Christianity the most at that time. He took him in. He accepted him and he loved him. And God only knows if that hadn't happened, if we would be here talking about Christ. So this is a great, thank you.
Sorry, no, go ahead, finish it.
No, yes, this is an example of how Peter transformed himself.
But I just wanted to say, and I think it ties in this, thank you for this talk, because it's so powerful for so many reasons in terms of just building in an empathy. And this idea of a golden code that you referenced, that Emmanuel suggests that the Bible is. And it goes back to this idea, something that I have actually recently been really confused, might even say I've struggled with, this idea of the golden rule that you referenced at the very beginning, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Because for a long time I felt that that principle on its face can allow judgment to be present at all times, in the sense of, if I am comfortable with a certain standard of behavior, even if that standard be a judgmental one, then reasonably by that rule I can apply it to everybody and just constantly be judgmental. So this idea of empathy, the gaze of Jesus, how that reconciles with it. And it was something that I really went back and forth on. Just it confused me, because I felt like I always came to the same place. And finally one time I feel like I got a thought, so I feel like this was definitely a spirit thought from somewhere else, that, maybe you just got this rule all wrong. He said, maybe the rule is not, when they say do unto others the way you would have them do unto you, it's more than just what your standard is and apply that to everyone. Because the truth is, you, and probably everybody else, actually doesn't want to be treated the way others would treat them. They want to be treated the way they want to be treated, just as you would. So the rule isn't do unto others the way you would do unto them. The rule is do unto others the way they would want you to do unto them, just as you would in the same circumstances. And once that was shared with me, it changed that focus, this idea of a judgmental to an empathetic gaze. And it allowed empathy into this rule that for so long I had thought was a rule that essentially built up a principle where you could reasonably have a harsh approach to people, especially if that was something that was comfortable for you. But yet, nevertheless, I felt, and I imagine many people would feel that it would be wrong to do that. Like there would be like a coldness applied to it, and it was really, and it was really then that I could start appreciating that the rule is so much more than the standard of focus be me. It almost requires the standard of focus to be everybody else. And to your point about examples, I feel this works so much better with examples. And then one that came out in my own life was, I have a family member that is very particular about the fact that when it snows, even a hair's breadth, that it be completely clean before anybody drives on their driveway or anywhere near their house or anything like that, which in Canada is a tough standard to maintain, because in Calgary, like, you can have just a sprinkling at almost any point in time. Now, for me and for anybody else, like, I could applying that golden rule, I could very easily have just said, well, I drive on the driveway, it makes no difference to me. My standard would be met. Like, I would be completely happy if they turned around and drove all over my driveway in this amount of snow. But I know that it would cause them worry and discomfort and anxiety, even if for me it would be completely fine. Yeah. And then applying this rule of like, well, no, you do unto others the way they would want you to do unto them. Then the answer is clear. It stops being about me. You stop. You stop focusing on where you're at, and it becomes completely about them. And from that moment on, it always is, where are they at? And this was the life of Jesus. Jesus never applied his standard, because we would have failed, all of us. Always. Almost every day. Because his was so much above us. He always tailored it, whether it was Mary of Magdala, Simon Peter, Judas even, whom he had compassion for. The standard was always perfectly tailored to that individual. And it allows for so much more fulsome to that idea. You stop fighting fire with fire, and it becomes like a sublime medication or a soothing that allows the entire world to transform, because it becomes about them rather than you. In any case.
Yeah, thank you, Attila.
Yeah, I guess what you mean, if I may, I guess you mean have this indulgence to others, to put yourself in their empathy.
Yes.
To look at them and see what they need. You know, try to understand what is their need behind that behavior. Not only judging their behaviors, but trying to understand why they are acting that way. To see the pain behind, because most of the time, when there is a reaction or there's something like in a way that you can become judgmental to some people, it's important to see behind what is the struggling that people is passing on to be acting that way. In that way, you can act with compassion and love and understanding. So it's perfect. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was
I
just
already
saying
talked.
because Renata is watching online and she's saying that question 919 helps us to understand the golden rule better.
Okay.
And she also adds that if you're not sure about your standards, ask yourself if you'd like to be on the receiving end of your own actions. So she just points that out.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, and like I remember one of those lectures em português, like I ouvi um galo cantar, não sei onde, I heard somewhere, I don't know where, that like good and evil is not relative, it's a universal rule. So if we think that like people are in different process of evolving, people have different ideas of what it is good to me, like do what is good to me to someone else. And we can bring the example of the man bomb. Like, oh yeah, I can blow myself up, so it's okay to blow someone up, right? And then that's where I am like, good is universal, so how can we understand that rule better? And one thing that made me think a lot is just like, if you think that good is what is good for the universal people, for everybody, and not what's good for yourself. For example, if I drive in 120k in Deerfoot, this is good for me potentially because I am late. But what if everybody else is doing that? Is that good for mankind? So just put it more perspective, because I struggle with that. Like someone might do out of ignorance, out of being fragile, do something that's not necessarily good, and they wouldn't mind being in the receiving end. So does that make his or her action good? Right? So this is what I would like to share a little bit. This is where my mind is going. Like again, some people blow themselves and they don't necessarily think this is bad, and they would do to someone else. That doesn't make it a good action.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, thank you all for the contributions, and absolutely, it's interesting because it's really key how our understanding and our standards will change. And we can use Simon as an example. When he was being very judgmental to others, when he was being very imposing a lot of shame on people because they were doing something wrong, he probably was thinking that, that was the way that he would like to be treated as well. But the minute that he was at fault, the minute that he did something wrong, and Jesus looked at him with love, he finally realized that actually he would not like to be treated in a way that was condemning, in a way that was judgmental. But he'd rather be treated with love and kindness. That only came to him because he experienced being at fault and not being judged. And that moment, his standard, like you talked about, changed. So now his new way of treating others changed because of his experiences that he had. And it was interesting because Jesus, in one of the very first slides that I showed here, Jesus said, Peter, your restlessness or your anxiety shows that you still have a lot to learn. You still have a lot to experience to be able to truly to truly be a loving and kind person, like Jesus taught him to do. And so thank you for that. And the empathy piece is very important, absolutely. And then just to end here, I'm just going to skip forward. I'll leave this one. I like this picture. So just to end, one of the last sentences of this text here, it talks about, let us look for something of the gaze of Jesus in our eyes, and criticism will definitely be banished from the world of our conscience. Because then we will have reached the great understanding that will make us discern in each companion, even when in the most disturbing thorns of evil, a brother needing above all our help and our compassion. So again, it's that gaze of Jesus, that no matter what the person or ourselves, no matter what we're doing, we are always needing help and support and not judgment or condemnation. And I'll end here because we're already a few minutes late, but thank you so much for all your contributions. The more you talk, the more we realize that it's touching, right? The words are getting across, so thank you very much. And if you have any more comments or questions, go ahead. If not, then we'll end in prayer. Thank you for all the online participants. Thank you, Hanata. So, dear Master Jesus, we would like to thank you for teaching us how to be loving, how to be compassionate, and how to look at us with love, with belief in our potential. And knowing that in doing so, we can be the world that we want to live in. Thank you, Jesus, for all your love. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to be practicing our communion with our Father, so we can learn from your smiles, from your gazes, from your experiences, and for all the apostles and all those that through their testimony we can learn and we can understand. May we find understanding and compassion in our lives forever and ever. So be it. So now we have our passes, our hands-on healing over here, and we'll have someone call you over if you'd like to come.